Put it back in session. Automatically shut down about 2 p.m. On a weekday.
So it's not just me.
No, it's they're done with the air conditioning. All rise. Please be seated.
Detective, in the statement that we just heard a moment ago, there was a mentioning of a violent sex offender that lived in the trailer park that was mentioned by the defendant. Are violent registered sexual offenders required to wear a GPS tracking device?
Some of them are. I can't speak for all of them.
In particular, did you investigate this particular statement, and had that already been being done to check for violent registered sex offenders?
Yes, ma'am.
And in particular, one living in the trailer park, was it confirmed that he was not at C2, but rather at and about his trailer?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, there was some mention in Mr. Coons' statement, as well as in the cross-examination questions to Detective Kotzman, about people of Hispanic origin being around the area, and even some sketch that a woman drew. Did you investigate and follow up on all of those particular leads?
We could the best. I mean, we did the best we could with them. The sketch barely resembled a human, so there wasn't much we could do with it.
When you say it barely resembled a human, did you in fact describe it as looking almost like a Sesame Street character?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And also, as part of your investigative leads, we've already seen a picture from one of Johanna Ortega's diaries. Did you in fact collect all of her diaries so that you could review them and see whether or not there were any investigative leads you could follow through those diaries?
Yes, ma'am, we did.
And did that lead to any fruitful investigation?
No, ma'am.
Now, I'd like to just briefly go through a few other investigative steps that you went through. Did you, in fact, execute a search warrant to have the Apple iPad examined by the SISU unit, I guess redundant, SISU of the Metro Police Department?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you also seek and obtain and execute a search warrant for Johanna's Instagram account?
Detective Halfley did that.
And was that under the name Johanna _banana
Yes, ma'am.
_XOXO?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you likewise seek, obtain, and execute a search warrant for Johanna Ortega's Apple iCloud under the name YoYoArty at iCloud.com?
Yes, ma'am.
Also, was a search warrant requested, obtained, and executed on the Gmail account for YoYoArty at gmail.com?
Yes, ma'am.
And also, did you do a search warrant, or seek and obtain and execute a search warrant on Johanna's Instagram account under a different registered email address, vendadita.christiana76 at gmail.com?
That was not a separate Instagram account. That was an email account that was attached to that Instagram account.
And so that was obtained as well?
Yes, ma'am.
In addition to that, did you have a search warrant executed at the location of Lot C4 with the residence of Roy Coons Jr.?
Yes, ma'am.
Could you briefly tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury the types of things that you obtained during your search warrant?
The search mainly focused on the shed where he claimed to have been staying. We took various shoes, boots, pillowcases, a white towel, an LG phone and battery, a Verizon jetpack with battery and carrying case, a pair of rubber gloves, silver multi-tool, which was actually found on the patio when he was taken into custody, pair of brown cloth gloves, black, white, pink sleep mask, and another pair of brown work gloves. From the residence, we found an ID for Mr. Coons Jr. in the very front bedroom, and we also took a pair of white Nike shoes from the master bedroom closet.
And did you actually seek, obtain, and execute the search warrant on Mr. Coons' car?
Yes, ma'am.
And those items that were mentioned by Ms. Fulton previously in this trial, those were the items that were recovered?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you likewise seek buccal swabs from various individuals?
Yes, ma'am.
And did you, in fact, attempt to locate the 3 individuals that the CODA system had shown an association with?
I did. With Jerry Claiborne, I searched through Metro police reports, traffic stops, calls for service, field interview reports, as well as checking for utilities, and I couldn't find anything that would place her in the Nashville area. I did in a database on a site called TLO, which is, they just compile personal information. I did find a phone number on that site that showed to an active Facebook account. I tried to reach her through that phone number, but was never able to.
You were never able, throughout all those investigative techniques, to locate and therefore be able to obtain a known sample, correct?
Correct.
Now, likewise, there were 2 other individuals. If you could first start with the one, I believe the first name was Donald. Is that correct?
Yes, let me find that. Yes, the next hit we got was the single sample that returned 2 possible hits.
So let me make sure, the one sample that actually showed 2 associations, 2 different people's
Correct.
names. Okay.
Correct. I believe his name was Donald Williams. All I could find on him through research was on the criminal justice portal website. It showed that he was possibly on probation. I contacted the probation office of East Tennessee, and that was listed as his probation office. They could neither verify or deny that he was even still on probation, and was unable to provide me with any current contact information, phone number, or address.
So you were unable to ever even locate or connect Donald Williams, other than this CODIS association, on this?
Correct. I also, in addition to that, conducted the same record searches, police records, traffic stops, field interviews, calls for service in our area.
And the second individual whose name was associated with that second CODIS?
The second person that was associated to the same sample was a gentleman named Billy Trapani. I was able to find records on the criminal justice portal that showed that he was incarcerated in Bloodsoe County Correctional Complex. I contacted Bloodsoe County, and they confirmed that he was taken into their custody on August 2nd, 2017, and was still in their custody. It was September 6th, 2017 when I spoke to them, so he had not been released from their custody at that time.
Now, in addition to obtaining the phone records for the individuals that were submitted to Detective Hyde, did you also obtain the search warrants for numerous other people that you came across during the course of your investigation?
Yes. When this incident happened, when this investigation first started, you used to be able to obtain phone records and data location records via court order. A Supreme Court ruling changed that during this investigation, so I had to go back and obtain some of those records via search warrant, records that we had already had. So we ended up getting what's called cell tower dumps, where they locate the closest towers to a location, and the dump is every number that communicated with that tower, either incoming or outgoing. We did that for 2 different AT&T towers.
And is that an enormous amount of data that you preserve?
It's an enormous amount of data that it's very difficult to even comprehend. And we actually ended up not using it, but we wanted to preserve it in case we had to. So we did there were 2 AT&T towers, a Spring Cell tower, Cellco, which was Verizon, and 2 Verizon towers and a T-Mobile tower.
Did you also obtain the cell tower records and phone records of Marlon Ortega?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Judge. Now, going back to this, if I could hand you a couple of items, starting first with this item. Do you recognize what that item is?
Yes, ma'am. It's a Samsung Galaxy cell phone.
Okay, speak up for me if you can.
I'm sorry. It's a Samsung Galaxy cell phone.
We have the air conditioning going, but I want to make sure everybody can hear. And that Samsung, do you know where that came from?
I'll have to double check. I think it was Patricia's phone.
And while you're doing that, I have a second one to hand you as well, so you can compare. Would those be the 2 phones that were collected from the residents? One of those including the phone belonging to Patricia Velasquez?
Yes, ma'am.
Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And if we could, at this time, Your Honor, ask that the Samsung phone be introduced as the next exhibit and the LG phone be the subsequent exhibit. In addition to those 2 cell phones, did you also recover a computer from within the home and with consent have that computer submitted to to SISU for examination as well?
Yes, ma'am. There was a laptop recovered from the master bedroom.
Was anything of investigative importance located on that?
No, ma'am.
If I could hand you this next item. Do you recognize what that item is?
These are the headphones that were attached to the iPad on the victim's bed.
So once you had the headphones and the iPad submitted to SISU, were the headphones removed from the iPad and you submitted those back?
That happened in the lab because initially we had the iPad processed and triaged for fingerprints and DNA. They were separated at that point, and then just the iPad went to SISU.
Here at this time, we'd ask that that item of the earphones be the next exhibit.
All right.
Now, in the interview with Mr. Coons Jr., there was some mentioning of a woman that he referred to by the name of Joe from trailer C9.
Yes, ma'am.
Were you able to go to that location and find out what her actual true name was?
Yes, ma'am.
And what was that?
Madge Green.
And would that be Ms. Green who testified here in court earlier this week?
Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Green testified about there being some caulking repair work that was done but over the overhang of her porch to the roof of her trailer. have you had an opportunity to, while visiting her, see that area of her home that she was describing?
Yes, ma'am.
And could you describe the ability that you would have had if you were to try to caulk the on top of seam between the roof and?
Your Honor, I'm going to object to speculation. I don't think he's been qualified as an expert in home repair.
This is a lay witness, what he physically would have to do.
I think he can testify as what he could do.
Exactly.
Not what other people could do.
Exactly, that's what we're asking, Your Honor. You have been there. If you were to seek to repair or by caulking that portion of Miss Green's overhang on the top portion, what would you have to do in order to do that?
I would have to have a ladder to get on top of the awning.
Now, do you see here in the courtroom today Roy Coons Jr., also known by the name of Ray?
Yes, ma'am, I do.
Could you point him out and describe what he is wearing?
He's wearing a blue button-down shirt, checkered tie, sitting to defense counsel's left.
Let the record reflect he has identified the defendant. Detective, how tall and how heavy are you?
I'm 5'9", barely, and 190 pounds.
And how would you describe how Mr. Coons looked back in August of 2017?
He's quite a bit taller than I am, but he was thinner as well.
Thinner than you are now?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, you have had an opportunity to see the window in the master bathroom, the open frame area, as well as see the window that has been removed and made an exhibit here today, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Given your width and height, what is your opinion as to whether you could fit through that window?
I could fit through that window.
What would you have to do to be able to fit through that window?
I might have to turn sideways, but I could definitely fit through that window.
How would you describe what you would have to do to have access to reach that height of that window?
I would need a ladder or something else to stand on.
Detective, what was done as far as attempts to locate any surveillance video in and around the crime scene area?
We went door to door. We did find a couple of residences that did have cameras. We were advised by all of them that they were dummy cameras or inoperable. We did find a residence on the A side. I believe it was A9 that had video, but the only useful footage from it was it verified the story of the two females in the red shirts walking around selling Xfinity products.
And without going into what they said, were you able to track down and interview one of those Xfinity female salespersons?
Yes, ma'am.
Can you explain what the purpose is of a forensic interview of a child?
As we know, children's minds can be very delicate, and particularly with an incident like this. We weren't sure how they were affected by it, and we weren't sure if they had been subjected to any situation on their own, because we still didn't know what had happened at the time. So we reached out to a company that specializes in interviewing children in such a way that they wouldn't traumatize them more and be able to get information out of them.
And were you, as a result of that interview, did you receive any additional investigative areas to pursue?
No, the women that conducted the forensic interviews felt pretty confident that.
Well, I'm not going to ask you what you said, but just as a result of that, did you have anything that was brought to light that you needed to investigate further with the children?
No, ma'am.
Did you, in fact, seek and obtain the phone records related to Drexel Cleveland?
Yes, ma'am.
And did you actually use the phone record number, the phone number that was recovered from Patricia Velasquez's phone?
Yes.
For Mr. Drexel?
Yes.
And subpoenaed those records, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And are those, in fact, the records that were then examined by Detective High?
Yes, ma'am.
Were you able, after speaking with Mr. Roy Coons Sr., were you able to verify through work records that he was at work during the potential window of opportunity for this crime?
Yes, ma'am.
And did his son, Roy Coons Jr., in fact, confirm that he had left to go to work and had not returned until afterwards?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you, in fact, have someone interview Mr. Hinton, who was the manager at the Hillview Estates?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, in the interview with Mr. Coons, there was some discussion about Cedar Hill Park. Once he gave you that information, well, first of all, are you familiar with Cedar Hill Park?
I am.
And when he was describing the location of where he went in Cedar Hill Park, were you familiar with that area?
I was.
And did you, as a result of that, actually go and confirm that matched, that what you believe was the area you went to matched the description given by him?
I did.
You've been handed an aerial photograph. Do you recognize that?
Yes, ma'am.
And what is that an aerial photograph of?
It's the most direct driving route from 1229 Old Dickerson Pike to Cedar Hill Park.
And is that a route that you've taken?
Yes, ma'am.
And is that estimation consistent with your personal experience of approximately, give or take, what traffic might be on a certain day, a reasonable estimate of travel time?
Yes, ma'am.
Your Honor, at this time we would ask that this aerial map of the route be introduced as the state's next exhibit and seek to publish. And if you can, just touching the screen, point out the starting point, which would be where the Hillview Estate, Hillview Mobile Home Park would be, and where the Cedar Hill Park would be.
The entrance is actually right here.
And you may or may not be able to do it on this size, but can you touch or point to the general area where Mr. Coons described he went?
It would have been in this general area over here.
Let the record reflect, Your Honor, it's about an inch off of the middle of, to the left of the midpoint of the photograph near the bottom. What is it about, how would you describe that area where you pointed, where you just pointed, that area? Is it an open field, or what is it?
There is an open area with picnic tables and awnings, but then it's surrounded by woods.
Detective, the question has been asked previously about whether or not the phone number from which the person using Roy Coon Jr.'s phone received a call during the window of opportunity of the murder, whether that had been followed up on. Did you follow up on that?
I did check some of the numbers.
What did you discover?
One of them was actually a spam call that I've gotten myself, which is a man's voice talking about that you need to contact them as soon as possible, or you're going to have serious legal issues.
And were you able to find any further information?
Not from those.
Why do you record witness statements?
So we can go back and make sure we didn't miss anything. Also to document their thoughts at their freshest moments.
Are you a DNA expert?
No, ma'am.
What type of specialized DNA training are you sent to as a precinct detective?
None.
Have you learned a lot about DNA in this trial?
I have.
How do you decide or make requests of what should be tested?
We depend heavily on our crime scene investigators as far as what they think is of evidentiary value. And once those items are collected, we have to rely heavily on the expertise of the lab technicians on what is most likely to give us results.
And was that done in this case?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you follow up on the DNA evidence to the best of your abilities?
Yes, ma'am.
Did that include multiple submittals of evidence to the Metro Crime Laboratory?
Yes, ma'am.
Did that include a submission of further testing to the TBI?
Yes, ma'am.
And 2 submittals of evidence to cybergenetics?
Yes, ma'am.
Can you explain a little bit about the process of what you have to go through to get approval to send something to be tested at cybergenetics?
Cybergenetics is very expensive. I had to speak with the captain of the CID, which is the investigations division, and get approval to send it. But there also has to be communication between the police department and the district attorney's office, because the monetary burden is split, not necessarily equally, but it's a commitment that both have to agree to prior.
And is there a cost associated with the production of the final report?
Yes, ma'am.
And is there a difference between the cost associated with the final report versus the preliminary report?
The preliminary report, if I remember correctly, was free. It's the final report that costs money, a lot of it. Did you expend every resource that you had available in this investigation? we could think of.
Now, after you had the conversation we heard a moment ago on the 18th of August with Mr. Coons Jr., did you at some point learn of a police encounter Mr. Coons had with a police officer while in a vehicle?
I did.
And the fact that there was no crime or infraction, but that encounter resulted in what's commonly referred to as a field interview, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Can you explain what a field interview is?
It just documents an encounter. It's often used to tie people to certain locations, if they're frequenting certain areas, a description of what they're wearing, who they're with, contact information, things like that.
And is that maintained within a database of the police department to be used, if applicable, in investigations?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
And was it brought to your attention by another detective that a field interview existed of someone who was with Roy Coons Jr.?
Yes, ma'am.
And what name did you learn of through that field interview?
Moses Okoth.
And what did you do when you learned about the existence of Moses Okoth and that he might know something about Roy Coons Jr.?
We went looking for him.
Did you know anything at all about the things that Moses Okoth has testified here today before you went looking for him?
No, ma'am.
What did you do to go seek him out?
We knew of a general area that he was staying, and we went to that area, and I believe we made a wrong turn and ended up leaving a business card with another individual.
At one of those different separate camps?
Yes, ma'am. And we ended up getting a phone call at the precinct later on from Moses.
And did you, in fact, meet with Moses
I did.
at the public library?
Yes, ma'am.
And did he give you,
Anything he may have said.
I'm not going into anything he said.
All right.
Did he give you a statement that was actually recorded?
Yes, ma'am.
And as a result of your encounter with Mr. Okoth, did you have an opportunity to speak with Alexandra Hemingway?
Yes, ma'am.
And was she cooperative as well?
Yes, ma'am.
Was she willing, and did she give you a statement?
Yes, ma'am.
And was that statement recorded?
Yes, it was.
Now, while you were there with Moses Okoth in this search for him, did you ultimately go to the section of the camp where Moses Okoth was staying?
I didn't actually go to that section until after we had spoken to Moses, and he told me better where it was.
And when Moses Okoth was able to describe to you this,
Genuine objection to hearsay.
it's not for what he's saying, it's how he got there. Did you go to an area where you located certain items of interest?
Yes.
And what did you locate?
It was articles of clothing and a blanket on a clothesline at the campsite.
Hand you these 10 photographs and just ask you to look through them and see if those are in fact accurate representations of the clothing, blankets, and items that were outside that tent in the vicinity of Moses Okoth's tent.
Yes, they are.
And were those items collected, many of them?
They were.
Your Honor, at this time we would ask that the series of 10 photographs be introduced as a collective exhibit, and in the interest of time, we will not publish them at this time to the jury.
All right.
Without going into the purpose of the hearing, did there come an occasion approximately shy of a year ago where a hearing was being held and the testimony of Moses Okoth was needed?
Yes.
did you in fact locate and transport Moses Okoth to that hearing?
Yes.
Prior to him testifying, did you provide him with any recording for him to refresh his recollection?
No.
And prior to his testimony, had you ever brought him to meet with anyone with the district attorney's office?
No.
And had you provided any contact information to the district attorney's office for Moses Okoth prior to that?
No.
I can hand you this last two items. You recognize that item?
Yes.
And what would that be?
It's an ID card for Roy Coons Jr.
Your Honor, at this time, we would ask that be introduced as the next exhibit.
All right.
And if the witness would be handed this last piece of evidence. Do you recognize that particular object?
Yes, ma'am.
And what is that?
It's a dirty white shirt with stains recovered from the clothesline at the camp.
And was that collected and submitted for examination?
Yes, ma'am.
Your Honor, we ask that be introduced as the next exhibit, and if I could retrieve exhibit number 65, the Chad High Call Detail Report. Showing you what would be paid figure 4 on page 10 of 23 of exhibit 65. And if this exhibit marks this red dot being 1229 Old Dickerson Pike, in which direction would the Cedar Hill Park be?
Actually, I went too far. Right here is Old Hickory Boulevard, so it's right here.
So, go ahead and do it again.
Sorry.
It's okay. Any other questions, Your Honor?
All right. Cross-examination. So Detective, looking back at exhibit number 65, and we are on page 10. If one were to travel down this road, which road is this right here?
I believe it's Dickerson Pike from what I can see.
So one could travel down this road and cut across to Cedar Hill Park just as easily, could they not?
I can't. Is this Interstate 65 right here?
It appears to according to the map.
Okay. It's a little blurry on my screen. If that's 65, this is Cedar Hill Park.
This is Cedar Hill Park.
Yes, sir.
So if one were living here, they could come down this road, getting into the range of this tower, and go to Park.
Yes.
Mr. Coons was informed on the night of Ms. Ortega's death that the girl had been killed in that trailer, correct?
That's what was testified to. I wasn't present for it.
You heard the tape that was played, though.
I did.
And that recording, it appeared one of your detectives was telling him that that had happened, and something along the lines of, if that happened to your daughter, would you want us to do everything we did?
Yes, sir.
So there was information out, at least that night, the night of, that a young girl had been killed in the C2.
Yes, sir.
And there were between 10 and how many officers canvassing that area?
I couldn't even guess.
Many.
There were a lot.
Okay. And did you talk with each of those officers after the fact to see if they had been telling too much information to some of the neighbors who were obviously concerned about the huge police presence in their neighborhood?
I did not talk to everybody that was there.
Okay. So we don't know what officers were telling residents and what residents told other residents. There's no way of knowing that.
Correct.
So Mr. Coons could have heard details about that crime from any number of people.
It's possible.
Did you do anything to interrogate Mr. Coons' Wi-Fi router at lot C4 to see if he had been connected to that router and what time?
I'm not even aware of the Wi-Fi router at his residence.
Did you search that residence?
We did.
But you don't know if there was a Wi-Fi router?
I don't recall seeing one.
No fingerprint evidence was ever linked to Mr. Coons or anyone else for that matter.
No, sir.
And to your knowledge, no DNA of Mr. Coons was found on a murder weapon, that is a ligature.
Correct.
Karate belt. And when you spoke with Mr. Coons, you didn't notice anything unusual about his appearance.
No, sir.
There was nothing to indicate, we saw the autopsy report, there was nothing to indicate Miss Ortega had been drugged, right?
Drugged, like, with chemicals, or?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
No, sir. Sorry.
It's okay. Drugged with a U. And we don't know if she was knocked unconscious during this attack, do we?
I do not.
And I believe you heard the medical examiner's testimony. Do you agree with him that there's really no way of knowing which injuries of hers occurred first?
I would have to.
He was the expert, right?
Correct.
And there's nothing to indicate that Miss Ortega did not fight with her assailant.
No, sir.
And you knew that she was a student of karate.
I did.
Probably knew some self-defense.
Objection, speculation, Your Honor.
Well, do you know whether or not she ever attended I believe we saw a certificate she'd been to a police camp. You know what happens at that camp?
Yes, sir. I've actually been an instructor at that camp.
Okay. Any kind of self-defense taught there?
No, sir.
Okay. You searched Mr. Coons' car,
We did.
and you recovered no evidence related to Miss Ortega or her lot at C2 in his vehicle.
Correct.
You never found any match to any shoe print.
Correct.
And in fact, you have no expert opinion that it was definitely a shoe print that was on Miss Ortega.
Correct.
It could have just been the way the blood settled.
I'm sorry?
Could have been the way the blood settled or some other mark. You don't know. And if you don't know, that's okay. I'm asking if you know.
The medical examiner believed it was consistent with,
The shoe print.
it was consistent with, but not verifiable one way.
Could have been the mark of something else.
Correct.
And I believe you testified that there was no surveillance or security footage within that trailer park of any evidentiary value.
That we could locate.
You found one video and it did show some Xfinity salespeople who had nothing to do with this.
Correct.
The cigarette butt that was tested in this case that had Mr. Coons' DNA was not outside the Ortega home, it was outside Mr. Coons' home.
It's my understanding.
Mr. Coons told you when you interviewed him 8 days later that he had been in the C2 trailer many times,
He said multiple times.
multiple times. Did you talk to his dad about whether he'd been in that location as well? I'm not asking what he said, but did you ask him that question?
I'm not sure.
Mr. Coons told you that he knew the Ortega family and had interactions with them.
Yes,
And when you came out to interview him, he voluntarily gave you DNA.
he did.
And he knew that you were recording the statement, didn't he?
Yes, it was out in the open.
Okay. And in fact, you made a statement at the beginning of it, I'm so-and-so, and I'm with so-and-so, and here's today's date.
Yes, sir.
Obviously, he was being recorded.
Yes, sir.
And it appears that Mr. Coons had been talking to some of the officers posted as security outside C2.
Yes, sir.
And we don't know what they told him about what had happened in C2.
I do not.
In his interview that we heard here this afternoon, it appears that he said he had told y'all, and maybe you, the day before about some things. Did he give you a statement the day before?
I believe he may have mentioned the strangulation the day before, but it wasn't a prepared interaction. I had no intentions of talking to him. I wasn't recording anything. I didn't have notepads out.
But he may not.
I'm pretty sure he did.
And you documented that in the report.
No, I wasn't prepared to have that interaction.
But 2 years later, you recall that he might have mentioned the strangulation the day before you talked.
Yes, sir.
When you arrested, did you arrest Mr. Coons or did that other officer arrest him?
It was members of the SRT team.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you over the
It was members of the special response team.
Okay, and they arrested him as residence in Lot C4.
Yes, sir.
And you have no information that Mr. Coons ever left Nashville, Tennessee during the course of this investigation.
Correct.
He did have a car, though,
He did.
that you examined.
We did.
Was that car, do you know whether that car was not roadworthy?
I believe it was.
So, any reason to believe he couldn't have driven that car to somewhere outside of Tennessee?
No, sir.
You collected Ms. Ortega's fingernails as part of your investigation.
We
Who
did.
directed that they be collected?
Yes.
I'm not saying you actually cut them yourself.
Yes.
And there was no evidence of Mr. Coons' DNA found in those. You heard the reports.
I did hear the report.
Inconclusive is the word they used? Does that sound right?
Yes.
Did you continue to investigate Mr. Coons after his arrest as far as, four questions, I'm sorry. Did you investigate anyone else other than Mr. Coons and his paternal line after his arrest in September of 2017?
The data that was sent to cybergenetics was unknown data.
Did you request that the male DNA from the outside of the window undergo any further testing in cybergenetics?
I wasn't aware of male DNA on the outside of the window.
Do you have any evidence that the Ortegas ever actually cleaned the windows in that trailer?
No, sir.
And you heard the mother's testimony at the beginning of this trial that she had never shampooed the carpet where Johanna Ortega's been.
I heard her say she didn't remember.
She didn't remember she had. That's fair. You heard that testimony?
Yes, sir.
Do you have any evidence to disagree with that?
No, sir.
Do you have no evidence that the carpet had ever been cleaned since they moved in?
No, sir.
The bedroom did appear to be in disarray.
Yes, sir.
Based on that disarray, you can't tell if there had actually been significant struggle in that room because of all the stuff thrown about.
No, sir.
Did it make it difficult to determine what had happened in that room as far as where she'd been moved because of all the clothing that was blocking the floor?
The blood on the bed and the blood on the wall kind of gave us a pretty good idea.
Were you ever informed about the partial male DNA profiles that didn't match Mr. Coons from the headboard? At some point, did you see that?
I believe so.
Did you ask that that be sent to cybergenetics for further testing?
No, sir.
Do you know how old the carpet was in that mobile home in Lot C2?
I have no idea.
Have you ever stretched carpet?
No, sir.
Have any experience doing that kind of work?
I've done construction work, but not stretched carpet.
Was Mr. Ortega's residence searched?
No, sir.
Did you determine that he lived at a location separate from Lot C2?
Yes, sir.
Were you aware that the Ortegas had a residence in Greenbrier?
I knew they had a property there.
Was that property ever searched?
No.
And this Mr. Drexel, whose name came about from I assume that came about, I believe you said from Miss Velasquez's telephone?
Yes, sir.
You attempted to locate and interview him, but that never actually happened.
Correct.
And you were alerted to his existence by, was it Chad High or Chad Gish?
Gish.
Chad Gish reported that?
Yes, sir.
When you searched Mr. Coons' house, did you find any gloves?
Not inside the residence.
You knew that Mr. Coons was a handyman.
From his own statement, yes.
Did you have any reason to dispute that?
No, sir.
And you were aware that DNA reports indicated that there was one sample that could have been two different people, apparently?
Yes, sir.
And you located one who was in prison at the time.
Yes, sir.
And the other person you found may have been in East Tennessee, but you really don't know.
Correct.
And you hit a roadblock when his apparent probation officer or someone in the probation system said,
They didn't know.
did they refuse to give you that information, or they just didn't know?
No, they just said they couldn't find the record.
Okay. Did your initial records indicate he was on probation for all these?
It was the CGIS portal.
You said that he was.
Yes, sir.
And they had no records of his last whereabouts?
They did not.
And the other person, which was a female DNA hit from the left breast swab, that Jerry, was it Claiborne?
Yes, sir.
You weren't able to locate her as well?
No, sir.
And based on your investigation, you have no explanation for how any of that DNA may have ended up on Miss Ortega's body?
No, sir.
But you don't doubt the science that it was there?
Objection, Your Honor. His opinion as to that would be irrelevant.
He's a lead investigator.
Still doesn't make his opinion
Well, I can ask
relevant.
it another way, Judge. Let me ask it another way.
All right.
You received that information, correct?
I received a possible association.
And you took steps to follow up on that information?
Yes, sir.
And you hit a dead end on 2 out of 3?
Correct.
You knew where Mr. Trapani was, right?
I did.
And where was he again?
Bledsoe County Correctional Facility.
And for those that don't know, is that a Tennessee Department of Corrections prison?
Yes.
Is there anything that would have prevented you from going there and speaking with Mr. Trapani?
No.
You chose not to?
No. Or yes, I did.
I think one of the last exhibits was some photographs of some stuff you found in a homeless camp.
Yes, sir.
Is there anything of any evidentiary value related to this case found in the camp?
No, sir.
Now, I believe you said that you tracked down Moses Okoth after finding his name for possible association with Mr. Coons.
No, I was alerted to the existence of this report.
Okay. Someone else found it, but they notified you as lead detective.
Correct.
You followed up on it,
Yes.
though. Okay. To your knowledge, had Mr. Okoth made any efforts to contact you before?
Not to my knowledge.
So you had to find him.
We did.
What about Ms. Hemingway? Had she tried to contact you before, left you a message, said I have information about a case, I need to talk to you, anything like that?
No, sir.
I believe you've said a couple of times, but you did search Mr. Coons' silver, was it Malibu?
Cavalier.
Cavalier. Okay. You did search that, you had searched.
Yes.
And is that the location where they found the orange and white polo shirt and the white sock that had Mr. Coons' DNA on it?
I believe that is correct.
And again, there was nothing in that car or Mr. Coons' residence or at this homeless camp that was linked to Johanna Ortega.
Correct.
I think that's all.
Read it, Brett.
Briefly. What day did you leave your card at the other homeless camp for Moses Okot?
I believe it was the day before he contacted us. I don't remember. It would have been after the 19th and prior to the 26th of September.
And on what date did Moses Okot call you?
September 26th.
On September 26th?
Yes, ma'am.
And on what day was Roy Coons Jr. arrested?
September 25th.
Was the arrest of Roy Coons Jr. broadcast on the news?
It was.
No further questions.
All right, okay, further?
No, Your Honor.
Thank you, Detective. Stage next witness.
Chad Gish?
He will be testifying as an expert,
Yes, Your Honor.
and Mr. Hopkins, will you stipulate?
Yes, Your Honor.
You swear to tell the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Would you please state your first and last name and spell your last name for the court reporter?
First name is Chad, last name is Gish, G-I-S-H.
Where are you employed?
Metro Nashville Police Department,
How long have you been with the Metro Police Department?
21 years.
What different assignments have you held throughout your career?
When I started in 1998, I was in patrol for 2 years, worked downtown district, and then I was transferred into a unit that we had called the armed robbery unit. I was working major cases. I worked armed robberies, mostly commercial serial robberies, and a lot of homicides. I did that for approximately 5 years. And in 2005, I got transferred to the unit that I'm in now that you've probably heard testimony about called SISU, which is an acronym for the Surveillance and Investigative Support Unit.
And just for interest of time, can you give us a brief overview of just your technical educational training that has led you to be in your position?
Yes. In 2005, I started training in both digital forensics and what we called cell phone forensics at the time. Basically, since the advent of smartphones, it's kind of merged into a category called digital forensics because we're all carrying a computer in our pocket now. But since 2005, I've got many, many certifications. I've got over 3,000 hours of training, probably 150 different classes throughout the United States. I've testified as an expert witness in both federal court and state court, probably well over 100 times.
And if I could stop you, what has been the title of your expertise?
Digital forensics.
Okay, please continue.
Yeah, so I've testified over 100 times in digital forensics in both state, federal court, actually in this courtroom, probably 20 times or more.
2 minutes.
Too many. But that's what I do. I'm an expert in digital forensics, according to the courts. And
If I could stop you 1 second, were you actually the person who worked heavily in the investigation and what's referred to as the Vanderbilt rape trial?
I did.
And you did
Yes.
digital forensic analysis in that case?
I did, yes.
Please
Yes.
continue.
So many times we're called in SISU to do different things, but digital forensics and electronics basically have a whole lot of different niches now. And we all have to have our own little niche where we used to do a lot of the things together, where I worked cell phone records and I worked digital forensics and I worked surveillance and all of these different things. Now we try to take on a couple of those tasks where I do a lot of surveillance now, but I would say about 80 to 90% of my time is sitting in the digital forensics lab working on digital forensics.
Now, did you have submitted to you certain items, specifically an LG phone and battery, as well as a Samsung phone and an iPad and a computer related to this particular case?
Yeah, that was the four devices that were submitted to me.
And if you could explain what particular evidence you found on which particular devices?
Okay. There was evidence really found on 3 of the devices, and I'm going to start with the Samsung phone first there. The only evidence that we found on the Samsung phone was the 11-minute 911 call. That phone appeared to be used mostly by the victim's sister. There was an LG phone that was turned in, that was submitted rather, and it belonged to the mother. I was able to extract data from that phone and recover information such as text messages that I think you've probably already heard of. Third device was a computer. I think it was an HP or a Dell laptop, either or, that was turned in. It was the hard drive there was imaged, analyzed, and no evidence of any value was recovered from that device. And the last device that was turned over to myself was an iPad mini, and it was turned in with a passcode on the phone or on the iPad. And I could not immediately get inside of that iPad to process the evidence, so I didn't know what we had at that point inside the iPad. But I did know that was the victim's iPad and that it had been recovered from her bed and had earphones connected to it like it had been used really recently.
If we could, if you would explain what you did with the mother, Patricia Velasquez's phone.
Okay, sure. And I'll make this as simple as I can. It can get really technical, but we're gonna simplify this so we can all understand it together. When a phone comes in, we want to get all of the data off of that phone. The iPhone that I'm carrying here right now, it has a chip inside of it, a UFS chip that where all of the data is stored. It's 256 gigabytes. That's a lot of data. And to explain how much data that is, think about a movie that you could download in standard definition from Netflix or something of that nature. That would be about a gig. So this phone right here on a chip that holds about the size of my thumbnail can hold roughly over 200 Hollywood movies on this phone. So that's a lot of data. The phone that was turned in, the LG phone, wasn't nearly quite this big. They didn't make data chips that big 2 years ago. And I think it was 16 gigabytes. So the first thing that we do when a phone comes in is we use specialized software that we're trained in and that we use daily in SISU to extract all of the data from the cell phone. So what we want to do is we want to extract all of that data from the cell phone, and then we want to power the cell phone off and turn that back into the property room because that would be considered the original evidence. And then we work off of the extraction or the mirrored copy that we get. What we also like to get from a data extraction is what's called a physical extraction. There's really 2 types of extraction, a logical extraction and a physical extraction. Even the 2 words you're thinking now, probably I would want a physical extraction because it sounds like more data. And it is more data. It's the entire data set of that chip. So if the chip is 16 gigabytes, then we recover 16 gigabytes off of that chip. A logical extraction would only be the data that you can really see on the phone as a user. Text messages, call logs, pictures, that sort of thing. Whereas a physical extraction can get all of the deleted data as well. You're recovering all of that. So the software did support the LG for a physical. We basically had to trick the software to say we were doing a different make and model, but we ended up getting a physical extraction from that phone. Once we got the physical extraction from the phone, that's when I started analyzing the evidence.
And if I could have Mr. Hopkins. Can you describe what that piece of paper is?
Sure. Since we got a physical extraction, we get things that are in applications that are considered third-party apps. Whereas a logical extraction would only usually get the default applications from the LG phone, such as the default texting application, the default call logs, default camera roll location. So we get those sort of things. But when we get a physical, we can get all the third-party apps. So if you have Facebook installed, we're getting all the data from Facebook. If you have Instagram installed, we're getting all of that. If you got eBay installed, we're getting all of that data. Well, there was a platform or a third-party app on the phone called Google Hangouts. And Google Hangouts is kind of like Facebook, really, if you think about it. It's a social media site where you can text back and forth. You can actually call, use it as a calling app, even on a device that doesn't have a hard line. It can call over Wi-Fi. And that was one of the things that I focused on was Google Hangouts at that point because I knew that there could be text messages in there. And what we're looking at here are some messages that I recovered from the mother's LG phone from Google Hangouts.
Here, this time we'd asked for that one page of the text messages recovered from the mother's Google Hangout to be introduced as the next exhibit.
All right.
Seek to publish.
Sure. And what I want to say is this was only a partial set of messages that were recovered from Google Hangouts. From the mother's phone, I think all of the Google Hangout messages were recovered from this day. All of them were from the sender, who is Yo-Yo, and I was since found out, of course, that was the victim in the case. So there were a lot of other messages, particularly in the morning time, but around the murder is where I focused the analysis of. And we can see that all of these messages right here that start on 4:15 and go down really to 4:19 are the ones that I concentrated on, were from the victim to Patricia Valaquez, the mother.
And when you say from the victim, you're meaning it's self-identified as the person who has actually sent it. It's a self-identified as being Yo-Yo A, correct?
Yes. So we can see here that the first message was sent on 8/10 of 17, and granted, on the second column, all of these are the sender. The first, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The first 6 messages are all sent by the victim in this case. They start on 4:15 and they end on 4:19. And we can also see that they're in Spanish. The recipient of all of these, of course, is under the recipient column, obviously, and that is the mother right here. And I can tell you that I've already done date and time analysis on that LG handset, and it was set to the current Central Daylight Time, so we know that the times were right, and they're in the local Nashville time.
Now, are you fluent in Spanish?
I am not.
And so did you utilize Google Translate to assist you in your in what Google Translate would, and how it would interpret these messages?
Yeah, as soon as I recovered the messages, I cut and pasted them inside of this form here. And then I used Google Translate to actually translate the message messages for me because I can't speak Spanish, because I wanted to get this to Detective Hill as fast as I could. So on the right side in the red is not my translation, but it's the translation after I copy and pasted the Spanish phrase inside of there, and we can see all of the translations on the right. So the first message that was sent to the victim was, "Mom, someone is knocking on the door." The second message was, "Already due." The third message was, "It was." The next message was, "I think it was the man who cuts the yard." And then the return message from the mother back to her daughter a couple of hours later, almost 2 hours later until this was sent back, is, "Okay, do not make noise."
And the return message back from the mother was sent at what time?
6:07 p.m.
Now, did you, after having located these text messages, did you focus on the iPad mini?
Well, we did, but as I stated earlier, it was locked.
So-
It was locked with a 4-digit passcode.
Can you explain kind of the technological hurdles that existed back in 2017 and early 2018 as it related to iPads and iPhones?
Sure, and we still deal with some of those hurdles today because it's always a cat and mouse game between developers and people who need to get inside of these devices to break the encryption. Well, like a lot of the mobile devices that we carry today, in 2017 on this make and model of iPad, all of the data inside that iPad is encrypted. So if we come across a device and we don't know the passcode to that actual device, but the data is not encrypted, we're still locked out in the sense of a lot of times. But what we can do is actually pull that chip or remove that data chip that I spoke about earlier that's about as big as my thumbnail. We can use special chemicals, heat, and we can desolder that chip from that board and actually resolder a lot of the BGA connectors on the back of that chip and get that chip back where it works, and then actually pull the data off of the chip itself without it even being connected to the phone. So if you think about it, a chip on the phone is really nothing more than one of these little small flash cards that you would put in your phone. It's a silicon chip. It's the same thing, but on these phones, it's just soldered to the board. So we found out that before encryption, even though passcodes were there, we could actually do this process called a chip off. It's really technical, but we can take the chip and pull the data. Once phone companies kind of knew that we were doing this, they started encrypting their data for user protection, for me and you. And so they started encrypting all of this data. Now if we ended up pulling that chip off and do a chip off on that iPad, and the chip was pulled off successfully, and we got all 64 gigabyte of this data, well, the data would be encrypted because all of the data on there is encrypted, and we need the passcode to decrypt this data. So that was not an option. We looked at that early on, but that wasn't an option. So the only option at the time was to send that iPad off to a company called Celebrite. And in 2017, just almost 2 years ago, that was the only company that we knew about in the world that could go through and break or decode the decryption by finding the passcode on that device.
What were the locations of the cell?
From what I understand, there's 2 locations that we can actually send Celebrite or devices to Celebrite. One of them is in New Jersey, and the second one is where the company was originated in Israel. So those are the 2 locations. So we got approval.
What did you have to do to get approval?
Well, myself,
Why would you have to get approval?
because of the expense. It's very expensive to send one device off to Celebrite just to unlock the device and provide us with the passcode was $3,200. And that was actually, from what I understand, a discounted rate because we own so many Celebrite machines. But we got approval through the captain. I think it was Captain Reinbolt approved for this to be done. We told him how important it was. We told him and informed him about the text messages that we recovered from the LG, but it was going to be extremely important that we try to recover these from the iPad as well, because that's where we thought that messages were sent from by the victim. So we got approval and we sent that iPad off. We paid the money and sent the iPad off to Celebrite. Roughly about a month later, they decoded the passcode, however, and they sent us the passcode and also the full extraction of the data back from that iPad.
And the passcode, was it basically the reason the one you'd been given wouldn't work is that some of the numbers were inverted?
It is.
When you got all that data back after all that effort, were you successful?
No. We went through, of course, in this case, we'd already spent a lot of time working the LG phone, so we knew what platform had sent the mother the text messages. We knew it was the Google Hangouts platform. Excuse me, it's getting late. So that was a great starting point that we had. So that's where I focused, was on Google Hangouts. And the way applications on your phone, so if you went to download, let's say, the Weather Channel, or you went to download Fox News, it downloads that app on your device. Then you can kind of see the little status bar that's rolling around, and then the next thing you know, after about 30 seconds, the app just appears on your screen. There's a lot of things that are going inside, underneath, in that software on that device whenever you install an app. And one of the things that happens is it's installing databases that will store your data. So if I was to use my Facebook app right now and send you a text message through Facebook, it would be stored in my database, and whenever you received it, it would be stored in your database. And that's how these devices organize data for user convenience and speed. It's stored in these databases. Well, the problem was the iPad and Google Hangouts that we were examining wasn't set to store the data. So at that point, we knew that the text messages just would not be on there. We all read the text messages. I knew exactly what Spanish words to search for, and that was another starting point. I used all of those words as a keyword to search the entire data set that was given back to us from Celebrite, but nothing. There were no text messages at all. So we didn't quit. We kept driving forward, thinking out of the box, because the text messages in text format weren't on there. And then I got to thinking one day after I looked at my iPhone. This is how I came up with it, so I think I need to explain it.
Please do.
Whenever you open an app on an iPhone and you close that app, it goes back to your home screen. And then you open another app and it goes back to your home screen. Well, you think those apps might be closed, but you can double click the button on your iPhone and all of those apps will load up there and you can scroll through those apps. So it's just like working on a computer. Whenever you're working in your email and you minimize your email, it doesn't close it, it just puts it in the toolbar for you to use later. So the only thing you have to do on these phones is double click that app and all of your apps will open up that you can scroll through and go through. Well, thinking that we were probably pretty much done with all of the analysis on the iPad because the text messages are not listed in there. I was going through all of my open apps one afternoon and I noticed that my Google Maps app was open and said that I was at home or at the office, either one, but I was at the opposite place, but it still showed me at the opposite place, but I was at the other place. So I knew at that point, so let's just say I was at home. I was at home looking at this, scrolling through, and that app said that I was still at the office because that's the last time that I used my app when I closed it down. Well, I knew at that point right there that that was a picture because as soon as I touched that application, it went back and showed me right at home. So what is Apple doing to force this to be a picture? Wasn't a whole lot of research or a whole lot of documentation on this. I couldn't find a whole lot of cases. I couldn't find any cases that this has ever been used with.
If I could just stop you, you actually attend quite a few forensic seminars and conferences where you and other experts learn from one another, correct?
Many.
Were you able to find anywhere any documentation of anybody ever having used this technique or discovered this?
No, I couldn't. But with as much training as that we receive, I knew right then that that was something to hone in on. So at that point, I started honing in on this. So databases not only hold text messages, the things that we talked about that would hold earlier. If you take a picture on your iPhone, it's stored in your camera roll, but it's actually stored in a database. So databases can hold other files as well. So then I started looking inside, way deep into the Google Hangout database, and I found some .png files, which are kind of like JPEG files, but they're portable network graphics. And lo and behold, as soon as I pulled one up, it was the actual Google Hangouts app through the minimized apps that it took a snapshot of, and we were lucky enough that it was still it was still in the state when she closed the apps where the last text message could still be read, where it says, "I think it was the man who cuts the yard."
Now, were you able to actually recover and take a picture or screinshot of that image?
Well, since it was a picture, a PNG picture, I just saved that out of the extraction.
If I can hand you 2 pieces of paper. Ask you if you recognize what those are.
Yeah, the first page, page 14, is the actual PNG screenshot that I found. This would be the app that would be through all of your minimized apps as you scroll through them. And the second page is actually the metadata about this screenshot. Every file has metadata. And when I'm talking about metadata, I'm talking about dates and times, where it was stored in the file path, and all of these different things. And we can see from the metadata that it was modified, which is the created date here, on August the 10th of 2017 at 4:19, the same time as the last text message that was sent to her mother.
Your Honor, at this time we would ask that, how would you characterize this? What would be the short title to call this?
2 pages from the full report.
If we could do that, Your Honor, for Mr. Detective Gish's reports late in the day. All right, Detective. Explain to the jury what we're seeing here.
Well, this would be that app that was open whenever you scroll through. This was the picture that I recovered, the PNG picture. And as you can see, the keyboard was still up. You can all look at your phones later or whenever, but even if I was to type a message right now on my app and then the keyboard was to come up and I was to close that app, whenever I double-click the button, it would be that picture right there with the keyboard still up. So we can see this was the snapshot that Apple created through Google Hangouts. And we can see that the last text message, well, actually it looks like 4 text messages, but the important one about the yard is in there. And one other thing to note too on this, I stated earlier in my testimony that Google Hangouts is a social media app where you can actually send communications back and forth to each other, kind of like Facebook. But I also mentioned that you could make phone calls from the app from an iPad device that doesn't have service. That used to be a really sticking point, and a lot of people couldn't understand that. But now there are so many apps that you can make Wi-Fi calls from that you really don't need a phone number. If we look over here onto the left, I believe it is, we can see that there was a missed call.
Can you circle that and then I'll zoom into that?
Yeah, I believe it was this one
Do you need to zoom in?
right there. I believe that was the missed call.
Now let me clear this off and I'll zoom in a little closer so you can see this a little better. Does that help?
Yeah, it's right there. I believe this was the missed call right here, this one, to the mother. Of course, there's no dates and times listed on there, but it was 3 minutes ago. So that had to be kind of connected or in relation to when that app was open.
So that would mean that in addition to sending text messages to her mother in the time around those messages being sent, there also appears to have been a call placed.
It does.
This app. Now, the fact that this was saved, does that have any bearing to whether you could tell whether or not this was the last time that this app was used?
It was.
If she had used this app anytime after this occasion, what would have happened?
The dates and times in the database would have been updated.
So this screenshot would be the, essentially memorializing the last communication on this device between Johanna and her mother.
At 419.
And showing you the second page of this exhibit.
We talked about metadata first. The picture that we saw above, right here, it's also included in this exhibit. This is the metadata that we see. So we actually see the name of that file right there. We can see the, just focus on the last three letters, the .png.
Okay.
There you go. All of the other information in this is arbitrarily named by the operating system when it's saved. But we know right here that's a graphic format, the PNG, and that's the name of the picture that we just saw, the snapshot. We can see the size of it right here. It's rather small. And then over here under the path, we can actually see where it was saved. If you go down through here, the important thing to look at would be this is the application. Sure, let me clear this. This is the application name of Google Hangouts right here. All of the applications with the iPhone, they start with a number. So that 716 is the application name for Google Hangouts. As we dig down deeper into it, we can see it was in the library, the caches, and then snapshots. That is what I didn't find any type of literature on, and I'd never seen that used in a forensic case before. But whenever we scroll through these apps, you can always think now that they're stored in the snapshot directory of each database. So that's where that picture is stored.
Can you explain to us this section here and what UTC means?
Yeah, if we look here in UTC, it says modified time, which it's basically the created time. Apple uses the modified time right there as the created time. It doesn't use the three timestamps of created, access, and modified. We can see that it was on 8/10 of 2017. If we remember, earlier in my testimony, I said that the phone, the LG phone, had been calculated and verified that it was in Central Standard or Central Daylight Time, which would be -5 hours. That's Nashville time. We can see that the iPad was also in Central Daylight Time whenever these messages were sent. That's really important because this date and time here needs to match up if that's going to be the device that it was sent to, and they match up to the minute. They may be some seconds off, but I can explain the time zones, but I think people know that we're in.
This is Nashville time.
Right, this is -5 is Nashville time.
Anything further on this exhibit?
No.
Detective Gish? Just one moment, Your Honor. No further questions, Your Honor.
All right, Cross.
Yes, Your Honor. Detective Gish, would it surprise you if you're the most enthusiastic witness we've seen in this entire case?
I'm an enthusiastic person, sir.
You clearly enjoy your job.
I do.
All right. So this procedure that you used to locate this screenshot was the first time you had ever heard of it having been done, the first time you had actually done it in a case yourself?
Right. A lot of times, like I said, we have to think out of the box. If we don't find the artifacts that we know should be there, go search for more artifacts. And that's basically what we did here.
That's what you did. Have you since used that number?
I have not. There's really no need to in other cases. But
I want to ask you about that metadata, and I know that number, but the last exhibit that you looked at, you had the access and something in the modified date.
Right.
And above that was what you call metadata.
Right.
Right?
Right.
How many pieces of metadata were in this iPad device like that?
Well, I mean, for the picture,
No, for the entire device.
hundreds of thousands, more than likely, probably. You have to remember, each file has a piece of metadata. It
When you
has,
say file, you're not talking, I mean, it's not as simple as an app is not a file.
no,
Within an app are,
50,000 files.
correct. And did you go through each and every piece of that metadata?
Oh, no.
And the reason I ask that is, we know from your testimony that this Google Hangouts metadata, the last time it was accessed was about, and it said military time, but about 419 in civilian time.
Right.
Would it not be possible to go through the metadata and see the last time that any particular app or file was accessed and modified, I guess would be the word Apple uses, in that iPad?
I did do that. After I found this, the ending point was 419. So we have to think, there's a lot of things with an iPad, my phone right here. Since my phone's been sitting here, I've gotten 3 emails pushed out to me. I haven't done anything. I haven't pushed a button on my phone. But there's been hundreds of pieces of metadata changed just because those have went to my phone. So now my dates and times on my email, if I went to look at my metadata, would show 4/12. I haven't been on my email since I was in the hall. So user-created metadata is what we're after. The user-created metadata for this app, for Google Hangouts, would have been when she double-clicked that button to close that app. That's when the 419 was probably more than likely stored right there.
On the Google Hangouts app?
On the Google, on that picture.
But I'm asking about all the other apps and the other metadata. Did you go through
Right.
for when those were all?
Sure, I know exactly what you're asking.
Right.
So as soon as I found 419 to be the most probable last time that the victim would have completed an action
On Google Hangouts?
on anything, on Google Hangouts, right, I went back through to see if I could find anything that was changed after that date and time, and I didn't. It didn't have a lot of data on it.
And are you confident that you were able to look at all of those metadata related to apps being closed?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I'm
Did you
pretty
put that in
confident.
your report?
No, but there wouldn't be any reason to put it in my report because that, between this and email, were the only 2 apps that she had on there that I recall that would even remotely have any type of communication on there.
What you can tell the jury then is, as far as this iPad mini goes, the last time anyone modified, let me show you, get my terminology right.
Sure.
Last time anyone modified an app was around 419.
Was around 419,
User modified,
user modified.
not including when other messages came in.
Not including whenever I went through there and tried to open the iPad with the code that was given.
That would have been someday.
That would have been days later, right?
But was there incoming metadata that came after 419?
Not that I could find. Not that would have been user created.
But that doesn't tell us anything other than she might have laid down that iPad mini at 419 and that was it.
True.
Now, as far as the translation that you did was through an application on the internet, correct?
That's right.
And the accuracy of that you can't attest to because you're not a Spanish.
Exactly, and I clarified that in my report when I gave it to the detective.
And so if the mother, Ms. Velasquez, attested a little bit differently from you, what she took that message to mean, or messages to mean, you would rely more on what she thought.
In her state of mind, sure.
That's all.
No further questions, Your Honor.
All right, thank you, Detective.
Thank you, Judge. I appreciate it. Hope you have a good weekend.
Any other witness?
That would be the state's case in chief, Your Honor.
All right, the state is resting. As I mentioned to you eons ago, when the state rests, I have to take up some matters with the attorneys. However, as you can tell by the time and the stage of this case, the state has finished this case in chief, and we have probably, I'd say probably 3 hours left before the case will get to the jury. So the obvious question is, what happens now? Well, we don't work on weekends. So Monday morning, if anyone has any difficulty, I think the fact that you are still on the jury will excuse that. I don't control the witnesses. So, you're gonna have to spend your weekend without talking about this case to anyone or trying to find out any information on it. We will finish this Monday. So I want you to have a great weekend, and we'll see you Monday morning. We will wrap this matter up, okay? Thank you.
All rise.
What I would like to do, please have a seat, is take up any motion for judgment Monday morning, since it's not going to take a lot of time, and any modifications or changes that you may want with respect to the jury instruction. And I will go through, how many witnesses do you anticipate, Mr. Hopkins?
Yeah, it depends, but one, maybe two.
Okay. And I'm sure they'll be pretty brief.
I would anticipate so.
Right, so we should finish everything at least by lunchtime Monday, and then the jury will get the case as it stands. So I'll see everybody bright and fresh and cheery Monday morning.
Judge, I think George was wondering if Your Honor wanted to address any issues on the charge right now or on Monday morning.
Probably Monday morning.
Okay, thank you, Judge.
Did you get the latest draft?
I did, but I haven't had a chance to cross-reference my notes to it, so I can do that before Monday.
Okay, all right. All right, have a great weekend.
Thank you, Judge.
We'll reconvene on Monday morning, 9 o'clock.